This podcast is part of the No Phony Podcast Network, the home of independent awesomeness.
Critics beat me up for that, but the picture did quite well financially. And they wanted more shark, more shark, more shark. And I would go to Spielberg and talk to him about this idea of this shark movie.
Ahoy, Casey.
How you doing, buddy?
Ahoy. That's going to be my new thing. Everybody's got a thing, like an entrance, a phrase, or wrestlers come out, to music. My new thing is going to say ahoy instead of hello.
Just like that.
Yeah, you're not liking it? Yeah.
Just ahoy?
I'm going to get rid of it. You know what? I don't like it anymore. It was brilliant. 3 seconds ago, I was like, what am I going to say to kick this thing off? And ahoy popped into my head.
Well, it kind of ties in with today's episode. If you would say ahoy matey, right?
Well, we didn't interview anything related to pirates.
No, but like boats, right?
That's true. I guess Jaws was a water in a boat sort of thing. All right. Well, then ahoy. Ahoy, Casey. How's it going with you, man?
It's going, man. It's going. I've been busy. Went back to work again this week. Drove out to Missouri and back. Did a few jobs. Felt kind of good to get back on the roof and do a little work.
You know what's so funny about you, man? It's like, how many times have I been like, hey, come on over and hang out? And you're like, oh, I can't come over. I can't hang out. So Casey, come on over. Hang out. Let's have a couple beers. Can't do it. Why? Why can't you do it? And then you send me like a picture of a house. You're like, I just built a house. What was it the other day? I just built this entire greenhouse garden. I'm like, what the fuck? When do you find time to do all this? And then you're traveling all the time. Do you ever put down I guess when you're doing podcasting, and that's the only time you ever put down a hammer?
Yeah, it's man. Today I didn't do anything. Today, the only thing I did today was editing of podcasts, my other show, On the Road with Jim and Casey.
You plug it every time. It's masterful the way that you work that plug in. I mean, it's really good. And it's a good show, so it's totally fine with me. Well, Casey, we have an interview today. One that I definitely appreciated, because this is a director. This is a production designer and an art designer, or an art director. I never get the titles right, but he's done so many things in 80s cinema, right? All the stuff that I've grown up watching, all the stuff you've grown up watching, right? I'm a huge fan of the Jaws series. I'm a huge fan of everything Steven Spielberg. I'm a big fan of John Carpenter, Escape from New York. He was part of. So who did you get for us here, Casey?
So today we will be talking to Joe Alves. He was the production designer, like you said, on the Jaws movies, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Fire Down Below, Drop Zone, Geronimo, Free Jack, Escape from New York. I mean, the list goes on and on. He started as an animator for Disney in 1956. And then wow. He did a lot of the Night Galleries. I think he did all but one episode of Night Gallery. Do you remember that show?
Yeah. Wow.
Yep. But as you find out in the interview, like a lot of this stuff, back then they didn't, there wasn't actually like a title for this stuff. And he went uncredited in a lot of these things.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were pretending we did the interview or not. That theater of the mind thing. We were just not great broadcasters. One day we'll get really good and coordinated and actually do, maybe one day we'll do a rehearsal. Could you imagine us doing a rehearsal?
Yeah.
No, it's not our style. All right. So, yeah, it was actually a great interview. And one of the things that I wanted to get out of it was I'd like to hear a lot about the way things are made, because we only see the final product. And then rumors sneak out about, was it a bad production or was it a troubled production? And everything that was made in the 80s seemed to be very rushed, seemed to be very but also very creative. Like there was a lot more imagination going on in the 80s, and I think there's a lot than there is in a lot of movies now. Because now we have the internet, we've seen all these places, but these movies back then, they took us on trips that we never were able to go on. So one of the things that I had mentioned to him is that I grew up, loving Disney World and loving SeaWorld. And when he directed Jaws 3, he directed in SeaWorld, he fucked all that up for me. I was like, oh my God, because now I can't even see SeaWorld without thinking about a giant shark in 3D smashing through the glass and attacking people. It's one of those great, like, when somebody says to me, what do you remember about the 80s? I remember a really poorly animated shark smashing through glass while I wore 3D glasses. And even then I went, what the fuck is going on here? So it's a great movie. It's got some warts, I guess. But he's not. You said to me, that he's not really afraid to talk badly about the movie. He knows what the movie is. I think it's absolutely great.
Yeah, another thing that we talked about with him, we got his take on CGI, how he feels about CGI, which I thought was really interesting. Because the way I feel about, like you were saying about the 80s, movies in the 80s, the way I feel, I think you get a better reaction from the actors when it was, not a live shark, but an actual prop or an actual monster dressed in whatever, than you do from an actor pretending something's there due to a green screen effect as now. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and when you first see that shark, when it first jumps up on the orca, and you're like, oh my God, that thing is like, it looks real, because you haven't seen anything like that before, and now you've seen nothing but CGI sharks and Sharknado. What are they up to? And it doesn't work. It takes you right out of the movie. I think one of the best examples of mixing CGI and practical effects might be Jurassic Park. The second they get a little too heavy-handed on the CGI, you start to notice, and that takes you out of the story. You're like, that's CGI. Okay, I'm now watching a movie. I'm reminded that I'm watching a movie.
Yeah.
So that in the 80s, they didn't have CGI. They just had those practical effects, and those things, sometimes they look silly, but sometimes they look more real than CGI does to me.
Right. When you and I were talking about starting this podcast, that was one of our ideas. I think it was going to be. We had talked about doing a podcast called "Too Much CGI."
Yeah,
we're both somewhat so into 80s. The actual real, not real, but the actual like props and the cheesy, some are cheesy, effects that they would use back then.
Oh, they were so much fun though. They were so much more fun back then. But now it's like they'll take everything and just CGI it up. So I like zombie movies, and I knew when we jumped the shark on practical effects, at least in my mind, it's when you had George Romero did Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and then he did Land of the Dead. And Land of the Dead, they decided, this is like about that time where Hollywood, Casey, they decided, like, let's start skipping on practical effects and let's go to CGI. And I remember it was early internet, and I was following any kind of news I could get about this movie. And, it was supposed to be practical. It was supposed to be working with Tom Savini again. And then the studio said, nah, we're going to do mostly CGI. And that I think is the story. And when you watch the movie, it just doesn't have that same feel. And I do blame the CGI on it. I think you can go a little crazy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with stuff today that they're making. Like, what's that new movie that they just came out with recently? The gangster movie.
The Irishman, yeah.
What's it called?
The Irishman.
The Irishman, yeah. Where they 75-year-old, 80-year-old men are their faces are CGI'd, and you can't get past that.
Does it look bad?
I thought it looked terrible. I mean, I couldn't get through the movie. It's too long. They have I think it's De Niro playing like his face is CGI'd, and he's supposed to be in his 20s, but in one of the scenes he's beating up this guy, and instead of using a body double, it's still 75-year-old De Niro kicking this guy on the street, playing a 20-year-old, and it looks like a 70-year-old kicking him. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
So it's a young face and like an old body.
Yeah, and it's just terrible. I mean, I
wow.
didn't enjoy it at all.
You know, that's the kind of thing that Hollywood wants to do now. Maybe it's cheaper. I guess it's cheaper. Easier to do, maybe. But yeah, not a big fan of that direction. One of the things that Joe talked about is one of the things that I absolutely love about Jaws, right? The fact that we didn't see that shark a whole lot was very Alfred Hitchcock-like, right? When you saw Psycho and she was killed in the shower, I don't think you saw any like actual stabbings. You just saw a montage of really fast, choppy stuff, and your brain put all that together.
Yep.
And that's what I really like about a movie. I hate when they just, hey, we now have the technology to show you what everything looks like. Let's just make it so in CGI. And it just takes a little bit of the imagination out of it. I like filling in the blanks because that's how I grew up watching movies. Not plot holes per se, but just like atmospheric things and, you know, visual things. You got to sort of fill in the blanks when you don't see it. And sometimes that can be even scarier because you don't know, you know, what you're missing.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of just showing everything on there. Like they could have told that story in The Irishman without having to show a 75-year-old body with a 20-year-old's face. Like we just didn't need to see that. They could have told the story a different way.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So you want to get into the interview here?
Yeah, this is a good one.
All right, man. So do us a favor. If you like this interview, click that subscribe button. You can follow us on Instagram, Deluxe Edition Pod. Same thing on Twitter. We have a website, deluxeedition.show. Facebook, Deluxe Edition. Yet another pop culture podcast.
I love when you read it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
And yeah, just Deluxe Edition Pod everywhere. And yeah, just click on that subscribe button. iTunes reviews, they help a lot. Anything you can do to help, share, whatever.
Tell your friends about us. We're enjoying this. We're going to be around for a while, so we wouldn't mind growing it a little bit. You know, I know there's a huge audience of people that, you know, enjoy all the stuff that we like. So we want to know who they are. We want to all do this together. So definitely share us around. We'd very much appreciate it.
Yeah, we have some great shows lined up in the future. So please click that subscribe button. All right, and here's our interview with Mr. Joe Alves. Welcome back to another episode of Deluxe Edition. With me, as always, Bill Sebald.
Hey, Casey.
Joining us today is an Oscar-nominated production designer, best known for his work on the Steven Spielberg classics, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Jaws, Mr. Joe Alves. How are you, sir?
Great. Great.
Wonderful to have you. You've done so much great stuff in Hollywood, especially everything that I've ever fallen in love with as a child and a teenager. Seems you've had your name on it, which is really an impressive resume.
I was fortunate, you know, it was the studio system then, and you did a lot of things that your name never got on. It's amazing. The credits accelerated in the 70s, but prior to that, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, you could work as an assistant art director like I did with Hitchcock on Torn Curtain and get no credit at all on the screen. The heads of the department would get credit. It's amazing. Things changed a lot in the 70s. But yeah, I was very fortunate to work with some great people, you know, Spielberg and, of course, Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, and I think you worked with John Carpenter, too. You did Escape from New York, which is an amazing movie.
I did Escape from New York, and then I was an advisor on Starman, and I did second unit on that.
Wow, yeah. So you're listed on your IMDb page. You're listed as a art director and a product, I guess it was a product designer. Production designer. So I'm not really sure what the difference is between those two roles. I was hoping you could sort of tell me.
There is no difference. Basically, let me put it this way. The production design credit came with William Cameron Menzies, Gone with the Wind. Prior to that, it was all art direction. And it pretty well stayed that way. And a couple people in the 50s got production design. And then more in the 60s and 70s, it became more popular. But basically, you're an art director. And they've elevated that to you're designing the production, like on Sugarland Express or Night Gallery, where I did so many sets. I was an art director. It wasn't until they started changing that and saying, oh, it's more prestigious to be a production designer. But actually, according to the Academy Awards, there was no production design credit for a long time. On Close Encounters, I got production design credit. My assistant would be Dan Lamino, was the art director. So they had to actually bring me down into art direction. But it's basically the same thing. It's just a different title. Today, on Close Encounters, I was a production designer. I had an art director, a couple set designers, decorator. Today on like Star Wars, they have a production designer and maybe 10 art directors. Huge, departments. And people, so it's changed quite a bit. But basically, it's exactly the same job. If you're heading it, today they call you a production designer. A few years ago, you would just be the art director.
So what type of things did you directly influence? Were you the one who, drew what Snake Plissken's going to look like? Or are you the one who designed what the boat's going to look like in Jaws? How far into what we see had your touch?
Okay. As a production designer, you start with a script and you break it down, and you're responsible for everything visual.
Everything.
Finding locations, the various machinery, the shark. I got very involved in designing that. And then as it develops, okay, for an example, let me say, I started on Jaws before Steven did. People are always shocked about that. But what happened was David Brown, Dick Zanuck and Brown were big producers. They did The Sting and Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, and they did this small movie called Sugarland Express with a new young director, Steven Spielberg. So I got to know them pretty well. Now, I'm a staff art director. That means I'm in the art department, and when I finish one project, the head of the department goes, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do Night Gallery, or you're going to do this television movie, and so forth. And that's how I got Sugarland Express. And Steven said, oh, yeah, I know, Joe, because we did a couple night galleries. So it went that way. But on Jaws, David Brown's wife, Helen Gurley Brown, who was the editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, read the galley sheets of this book called Jaws and said, I thought it would be make a pretty good movie. So they had no money. They had no budget. They were not involved with the studio yet. So David called me and said, if I send you to the galleys during your spare time, could you do some concept sketches based on the book, that anything with a shark in it? So I went to the head of the department, and the fact that the Zanuck and Brown was so prestigious, I was working on a television movie and they had a lot of locations. So I didn't have to go check them out more. So I had pretty much a lot of free time. So I started doing sketches of sharks. And I did about 30 charcoal renderings, about 11 by 16. And I would go to Spielberg and talk to him about this idea of this shark movie. And the studio wasn't looking too excited about doing a shark movie. And Steven, yeah, they had somebody else plan to direct it, and they didn't like his attitude towards it. And Steven and I talked about, if we did this, we should do a full-size big shark in the real ocean, not in a studio lake or something. So basically that's how that developed. And then Steven got aboard, and we had a big meeting in Marshall Green's office, who was head of production. We had all the department heads there, basically. And an unusual thing happened. Marshall sort of liked the idea of the Jaws thing because they lived on a boat. So basically, I wasn't being paid by Jaws to do these drawings. They were just absorbing the money because they didn't have a movie yet. They had nothing. And so the idea that Steve and I wanted to do a full-size shark, like 25-foot shark in the real ocean. So after I did my presentation, Marshall asked the head of the effects department that was in the meeting, can you guys make that shark? And they said, no, it's never been done. No one's ever made a 25-foot shark in the real ocean. It would take a year and a half to do it. Besides, we have bigger movies to do, like the Hindenburg. And Marshall got pretty upset and said, Jaws could be a bigger movie than the Hindenburg, and everybody laughed. Of course it was, this little shark movie. So that's how it started, basically. So the year and a half, as I was collected my drawings and everybody left, Marshall called me back and he says, can you get the shark made? And I, being ambitious and young, I said, yeah. He said, well, take it off the lot. Don't do anything on the lot, which is very unusual because everything was done in-house. If there was a Paramount movie, you did everything in Paramount. So anyway, that's basically how it started. And so then I was responsible for designing the shark, putting a team together. That's pretty much not normally what a production designer does, but you oversee some of that stuff anyway. So basically, I got that started, and then I started looking for the locations and met with Peter Benchley, asked him where he wrote the book, and he was an East Coast guy. His parents lived in Nantucket. So basically, he didn't have any specific places, he said various Sag Harbor, Covington, Montauk. As I say, there's a small movie, so there was nobody else on the movie at the time. So I went and I scouted it by myself and drove hundreds of miles looking at beaches that were covered with snow. He said to go to Nantucket and see his parents. His father, Nathaniel Benchley, lived there, good writer, and his mother. And so I got to Woods Hole and I took the boat to Nantucket. Well, I asked him, I said, what about these islands? Because what I needed was not only in a nice little village, I needed a section of water that was a bay that was like 25 feet deep that could accommodate the shark. Bob Mattey had made this platform shark that would sink, and we needed 25 feet. And it had an arm that came up on a track. And we needed a small tide. In the West, the tides are like 12 feet. But, we're looking for a small tide. Anyway, long story short, I started to go to Nantucket, and water was so rough that I turned the boat around, and I'm in Woods Hole, and I see a boat to Martha's Vineyard. And I said, oh, I'll go look at that. So I went to Martha's Vineyard and was blown away, because Edgartown was perfect, Menemsha was perfect for the fishermen. And then they had a bay there that was 25 feet with a 2-foot tide. So to me, that locked it in. But to answer your question, basically, the production designer, art director is responsible for everything visual. And then you bring in the wardrobe department, and you bring in the special effects, and you bring in the props, and they all coordinate there because the props have to work with the sets, and the costumes have to work with the period and everything like that. So you're really the key sort of visual person, and obviously you're working with the director closely, depending on how visual the directors are. Some of them are quite visual, others just let you take care of that aspect, and they focus on the actors and the script. But anyway, I just while we're talking about that, there's a book I have out called Joe Alves Designing Jaws, and that breaks down everything, and I just want to show you briefly. See, this is like a set breakdown, and you go through every page.
Oh, wow.
And you break down scene by scene what's needed, and then you start bringing people in to accommodate that. But the book has been very well received, and because it's different. It's a book about designing, not not the director or the writers or the actors. It's about how we on the other side of making a movie, function.
I think that stuff is absolutely fascinating. You said something earlier that I thought was interesting too, because I always think about how it works behind the scenes, and we see the actors and we get to know the director and we say, okay, they're the ones responsible for the movie, and we all know that there's really a bigger team. And the thing that you said that was really interesting was there's things sometimes you do that are uncredited. So I've always heard that you actually helped shoot some of part 2 as a director, and maybe that's how you got your role as a director as part 3.
Yeah, what happened was, this is interesting. Jaws 2, I was just finishing Close Encounters, and I was coming back, and it was interesting because I was in Pensacola. I was in actually Mobile, Alabama, but there was this girl I met who had greyhound dogs, and Sundays she'd go run it on the beach, and I went to this beach in Pensacola. And I said, my God, if we ever did a Jaws 2, this would be a great place to do it, because there were no boats and no traffic. And we had a lot of problems in Martha's Vineyard in the summer with all the boats. Anyway, I got back and I understand they had a director, John Hancock, had started Jaws 2. Now get this, I made The Shark with Bob Mattey, Roy Arbogast, and a few guys away from the studio. We made 3 sharks. And it cost about $250,000 at that time. I came on, they had started making or remaking The Shark, because they destroyed the first ones, on the studio lot, and they had already spent $2 million. Because what happens when you're on the lot, if you have a successful movie, they're doing a sequel or something, they charge all that money to that picture, because it's going to make money. So what happened was, Zanuck and Brown offered me the production design job. I was didn't know if I was so excited about doing it. I actually directed a sequence in Jaws. Steven left me with, wanted me to direct the Kittler boy getting eaten on a raft. So I did that. So besides doing all the storyboards, I was really familiar with how to direct, It's just, I knew where the camera was going to go. I knew what the action was going to be. So that transition wasn't difficult. So Zanuck and Brown, they said, we'll not only make you production designer, we'll make you an associate producer. So you'd be involved with all parts of it, and you could direct second unit. So that was great. Steven called me and he said, I did this movie in 1941. I'd like to have you design it. And I was very close to Steven. We did 3 movies together. And said, they're offering me, these 3 positions. He said, I'll give you the same thing. But he didn't have a deal. It was just, maybe it was going to happen. And, Hollywood, if you don't have a deal, it could be forever, So I went with Zanuck and Brown. And I ended up, what happened was, John Hancock, nice guy, he and his wife, Dorothy Tristan, were rewriting the script and doing things. And John was having a hard time with the film. And we were on the day shooting, and he wanted to wrap like 3 o'clock. It was the summer. We had a lot of light. And Tom Joyner, who was the production manager, who was the first assistant on the first Jaws, we went down and talked to him. John, you got to keep shooting. Well, I'm having some problems. So I started doing some second unit for him. And then I was organizing the Shark, all the Shark stuff we're going to shoot in Pensacola, Florida, Navarre Beach. And so I said, okay, well, you guys work on this. I'm going to go down and see how the Shark's doing with Bob Mattey and his team. So I left, went down and see how the Shark routine was going. And I heard that they fired John. So I got back and talked to Verna Fields, who won the Academy Award for editing Jaws. And she was now vice president. And they said they're going to cancel the movie. And I thought, well, why are they going to do that? We're building the Shark. We could. And so I talked to Ned Tannen, who was the head of production at the time. She said, what, you and Verna want to direct it, co-direct it? Because Verna and I both did some second unit on the first one. And she's an editor, she's certainly knowledgeable. But the Directors Guild wouldn't let us do that. But there was a director, Jeannot Schwartz, which did like 23 episodes of Night Gallery. And I really liked his method of working. He was, he would always have a way of finding something to do it a little bit better than you would think it could be done. And he did a movie called The Bug, and Verna looked at it, and we went to Ned. And so anyway, we got him the job to direct it. We brought Carl Gottlieb back in to rewrite it. And then we were so far behind schedule-wise, we had to start shooting. And so I think I directed 85 days of second unit. So Jeannot could focus on the actors. A lot of problems, with some of the actors. Roy Scheider didn't really want to do the sequel. And it was difficult. It was a very, very difficult shoot. And now here's the problem, too, is that on Jaws, Steven, as well as Verna and myself, because I did all these storyboards. I mean, I did like 200 of these things. So we knew, what we wanted. And some people said, oh, you didn't use the shark too much because it didn't work. That's not true. Basically, it was more of a Hitchcock thing. We used the barrels to say the shark's coming, and and the little the wharf that turned around, and the girl getting pushed around without the shark. And that was all Spielberg's concept of not overusing it. Now, shark had a bad reputation because, as I told you, a year to a year and a half it was take to make the shark. Well, we started building the shark probably late November of '73. The book came out in February '74, and the studio said, we're going to start shooting in 2 months. So we didn't have the year and a half. We had 4 or 5 months. So Bob and his crew were working night and day to try to get this thing ready. And Steven ended up shooting everything we could possibly shoot without the shark. And then basically I would go to Bob and I would say, you got a shark working, because there are 3, or the left to right, right to left shark, and then one on a big crane. And he says, well, maybe the left to right. So then I'd go back to Steven. I think maybe the left to right's working, and would go through the storyboards and say, oh, here, 182, 83, 84, we could do that, let everybody know. And I would say, if it worked, we shot it. If it didn't, it was a test. And that's basically why it took so long, and why things didn't work, and we were over budget and over schedule. And when we got back, we were not heroes. They threw the shark in the back lot and let it rot. They sold the boat, the Orca, then they had to buy it back. So we went through this whole period. The idea that there ever was going to be a Jaws 2 was nonsense. But in any case, on Jaws 2, now it's studio into it, and they wanted more shark, because they figured the more shark, that's what the people wanted. Well, I shot a lot of shark, and Jeannot shot a lot of shark, but then Verna and Jeannot cut it down to was a more reasonable presentation. So that was my involvement in getting to do a lot of second unit and shooting. And then Jaws 3 is another story.
Yeah, there's always stories. I've heard these stories about the 3 different sharks, being on the back of a truck going down the highway. That just must be an amazing sight to behold. And you always heard the stories about, it didn't work, and then suddenly it worked, and it worked just in time, and you were able to get the movie done. And, Steven was able to shoot a lot of the talking scenes. So it's really interesting to understand how all that is put together, the pressure of hitting a deadline. I've always wondered, does a studio say, do they come in and say, hey, you guys are doing amazing stuff here, we're really feeling what you're doing, we'll give you a little bit more time or a little bit more money? Or do you always feel like there is a deadline, there is a money number to hit, and it's high pressure and maybe not as fun as it seems like it might be on a movie set?
I think they try to cancel the movie 4 times.
Really?
Wow.
they were not really friendly. I got to tell you, Marshall Green was very. He's the head of production. He was very helpful. Sid Sheinberg, his wife, was in the movie. Not that saved the movie, but it didn't hurt. They would come and visit, but there was a lot of pressure on Steven. And let me tell you why. Steven's concept was that the three guys out on a boat alone. He wanted to see no boats out there. He wanted to see these guys totally isolated. In fact, Shaw breaks the radio so that Scheider can't call and say, "Hey, help us." So, but the problem is this: when I scouted that wonderful bay, that was in December, and there was nobody out there. Come June and July, the boats from Hyannis were just streaming in, and there's so many people. And Steven didn't want to see any boats. And even though we were shooting later July, most August, still a lot of boats. So we had to send little runners out there could you move? And some people cooperated. Other people just wouldn't do it, So Steven would sit there and wait until the boats drifted away so he could get the shot. And of course, the studio was upset. Why isn't he shooting? Why, well, he doesn't want to see. Well, today, we could just, with CGI, just get rid of all that stuff. But we couldn't then. So that was very time consuming. And then waiting for the shark. Let me just say a simple thing, like the barrels coming and going under. All right, I'm going to shoot the barrels tomorrow. It's storyboards. You know what that takes? That takes the day before, figuring where you're going to shoot, going out there and laying a 2-ton piece of cement block with a shiv, with a cable, so that when the barrel came like this, the cable would drop it down to the anchor down there and bring it. So just a simple shot like that required a whole day in advance to do that. Using the shark required, which shark are we using? We got to prepare for that one. And of course, what happens is electronics and salt water don't like each other. And as soon as you put it down, it starts eating. And so then Bob had to find different ways of doing it. So it was endlessly difficult. And as I say, when we got back, we had some stuff. We were going to do something on the back lake. So it was interesting at this point. The studio wasn't crazy about the picture. We're over budget, over schedule. And I was concerned whether people were going to laugh at the shark, because the shark made funny noises because of the valves. So we didn't have the John Williams music, So after a shot and Steven said cut, everybody would laugh at that silly shark, So my concern was the audience is going to laugh at this silly shark. So they had a screening in Texas. I wasn't at that one. And Steven came to me. He said, Joe, we got 4 screens. I think we can get 5. I'd like to get a couple shots. One where the shark is hitting the boat, show me the way to come home, boom, boom. And you see the hull starting to split and water coming in. And then I want to see the head when Dreyfus goes down and loses his little shark teeth. I want to see the head. And so I said, okay, so I have a shop. I know how to build things. I've built part of my house. And I built 2 hulls. And the one hull which showed me the way to go. We shot that in my driveway with a hose, and somebody had a hose, and Steven was shooting that. And then the other one was we shot in Verna Fields, who's the editor, in her swimming pool, and I made another hull with a hole in it, and somebody just stole the head out of the makeup department, and Steven got a camera, and we shot the head. When you go down and Dreyfus freaks out and the head just floats out. So we had in Lawndale the second screening, and I was there with most of the crew and all the executives, Lou Wasserman, Sid Sheinberg, and what have you. Well, they didn't laugh. They screamed. The audience screamed, and Stephen was so right. Here, that other head in the hole just freaked everybody out. So what happened is, I think for the first time, the studio realized, gee, I think we got a successful movie here. Get this. After all where we were put down, we didn't know what we were doing. The shark never worked. This young director. So they went back, I think, in the bedroom, and they said, maybe we should make this a wide release. Now, get this, in the summer, that was never done. It was big releases were done October, November for the Academy Award, thing. And so maybe they would release in, half a dozen theaters or something. They decided to release it in 450 theaters, which is the biggest summer release at that point. Now, of course, it's thousands, but that was huge. And within the first week or so, it made its money back, So that's a story of Jaws. It was just like a fight to get it done, and then not being well received. And then suddenly it's a big success.
Right, yeah.
And what helped with that is it carries over to the next picture.
It's interesting to me. So when you said that they wanted to shut down Jaws 2 a few times, I'm thinking that's super weird because
Not 2, Jaws 1.
I'm sorry, I thought you said it was 2. Got it,
No,
yeah.
Jaws 1, they're going to shut down. Jaws 2, they were pretty well. With Jaws 2, excuse me. No, they were going to, Jaws 1, they were going to shut down for it. Jaws 2, they were going to cancel. Yeah, they were going to you're right. After they fired John Hancock, they were going to end it. And then I brought in Jeannot. So, yeah, you're right. I was confused on that.
By the time they get to 3, there must be so much pressure. There must be so much momentum to make something great. And you have the formula. You've probably, by now you've figured out how to make the shark work in seawater. So this is the one that I remember the most because I'm 45. I was, a kid when I remember seeing all the 3D movies were starting to come out. And this one I got excited about. But it was really different because you decided we're not going to do the beach thing anymore. We're going to do SeaWorld, which to a kid who's 10 years old, Disney World, SeaWorld, those places are the mecca, right?
Didn't it?
Yeah, so it was really kind of freaky to see this happening in a park. But I'm curious how that change came about. Why did you break the formula of doing the beach?
Well, it was interesting. I was doing a movie called The Ninja. Irv Kirshner was directing. It was on it for 6-7 months. And it was for Fox, and it got canceled because Fox got a new owner. I came back to Universal, came back to Hollywood because I was back east in New York doing it. And I went to see Verna Fields because I always went to see Verna. She had an office, and then we'd go hang out there. Carl Gottlieb and I, and we're good friends with her. And so she said, Joe, they've been making this thing, Jaws 3, People 0. Joe Dante was going to direct, and it was really a script about making fun of the people that made their most successful movie, which is pretty disgusting in that that was their, to take the people that made their big movie and make fun of them. Oh, the shark didn't work. Anyway, I think the word is Steven got really upset with this. And so they canceled that. And nobody was interested in a 3 because there weren't that many sequels. Or, I think Stallone had a couple. What was that thing he was doing that? He had a number of sequels.
Rambo, Rockies.
Rambo, yeah. But anyway, so there wasn't too many 3s at that time. And so the studio didn't really want to do it. And they sold the rights to Alan Landsberg, who did sort of low budget television things like That's Incredible and stuff like that. So Verna said, why don't you go talk to Landsberg and try to save this franchise, because we worked so hard on the first 2 to have, sort of a cheap television producer make a ripoff. So I went to Landsberg, and he told me that they had a rough script and it was at a theme park. Richard Matheson had written it. And why don't I go scout some of the theme parks, the water parks? And he says, I'll let you produce it. I said, I really don't want to produce it. Either I direct it or, I don't want to be involved in. And having directed so much of the second one. So he said, well, go scout with Matheson and come back to see what you do. So anyway, we went and we looked at a number of theme parks, obviously, Orlando, and we looked at another one in northern Florida. And there was a little concession there that had a movie. You walk in and you see a 3D movie, underwater movie with glasses. And it was incredible with all the underwater stuff, the various animal life and, the seaweed and stuff. And I thought, wow, I like the depth of this. And so I came out and Richard said, what? Jaws in 3D? I said, no, Jaws 3D. So you take the onus off the 3 and just have a Jaws with a 3D. And so I got back to what I did was, it was Thanksgiving. I was at my sister's house and I did a drawing of a shark with Jaws 3D coming at you. I showed it to Landsberg and he flipped out. He said, let's go to the studio. So we went to Steinberg, showed it to Steinberg by illustration. He said, can I have this? I said, of course you can have it. You're the president. He said, I want to take it to Wasserman. I want to show it to Lou. So, who was ahead of everybody, and they flipped out the whole concept of doing Jaws in 3D. So that got me the directing gig. But guys, let me tell you, I had no idea that, first of all, it was old equipment. They didn't have any new stuff. And I said to Landsberg, I says, we have to start building some sharks. Oh, no, I've got a lot of stock footage of sharks. I said, no, we got to build a shark, and it's got to be bigger because we're going to have Simon McCorkindale in it, so it had to be like 35 feet. Needless to say, it was without a question very difficult working in 3D. We had Aeroflex ended us building cameras. We shot a week with the old stuff. It didn't work with the convergence, so we had to reshoot. But we got small Aeroflex underwater stuff. But boy, we'd see dailies and rubbing our eyes, getting that convergence together. Then I had this cheap producer, and it was very, very difficult. Probably the most difficult thing was the fact that I did not have Final Cut. So when I made Jaws, I cut it the same as 1 and 2, about two hours. And somehow Landsberg found out if we cut it down to 1:35, we could get 5 screenings a day instead of 4. So they just cut it.
Wow.
So a lot of the substance of, relationships, Leah Thompson with John Pudge and all those things that were just cut. So that was a little disappointing, but critics beat me up for that. But the picture did quite well financially,
Yeah, it was a hit. So there's a director's cut somewhere in this head of yours.
I have a can of 35 millimeter film.
Really?
I know, but well, it worked for what it was, and the first 3 did very well. The 4th, I had nothing to do with that, and but there seems to be an interesting thing because you mentioned, Bill, your age. A lot of directors, a lot of people, like my writer that did this, he's 55. Greg Nicotero, who wrote the foreword to this book, who did The Walking Dead, he's around 55. And who did I have a conversation with recently? Kevin Smith directed a lot of Jaws influence. He's about 50. But they grew up with Jaws. And like Jaws 3 became a big thing, and they were influenced. A lot of directors, J.J. Abrams, so that was a period where they were, getting of age that those movies were influencing them. And so what happened basically, it was interesting, is after Jaws 3, I was tired of sharks and stuff. Didn't really think about it. Probably as the 30th anniversary of Jaws, I start meeting people and Greg Nicotero, and I'd give them copies of my storyboards. And people said, oh, no, you should start selling these storyboards, which I do online, joealves.movieart.com. Been doing that. But then there's this interest in the movie that happened, 30 years ago. And now this year is the 45th anniversary of Jaws. And I get so much mail, is so much interested. And the book that we brought out, Titan bought the book. Suddenly, there was this incredible interest in this 45-year-old movie. And it's a lot because of the people that were young and inspired by those movies in the 70s are now at an age where they're doing something and they influence, things. So it's quite interesting because if you look at the 70s, you have the Jaws, you have Close Encounters, you have Star Wars, Godfather. It was an incredible period of time.
Yeah, I always think about this too. Like my whole family, we're from the East Coast. We go to the Jersey Shore. There isn't a time that I remember being a kid walking out and thinking there could be a shark out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents too. Like, oh, I don't go in the water anymore. Maybe being behind the scene, you don't have that sort of. It doesn't impact you the same way, I would guess.
No, it doesn't at all because, and what happened is Peter Benchley realized this. Peter's gone, but Wendy Benchley, his wife, what happened was we were just making a prop. Do you understand? It could have been Frankenstein. It could have been, spaceships. It was just a prop. And we had little idea that it would affect the shark population because it gave these people that wanted to go out and kill things a justification, and they just started killing sharks like crazy because, oh, Jaws did it. And then people, obviously were afraid of it. So Peter and they spent a lot of time trying to conservation for sharks and stuff like that. But we had no idea. It wasn't the intent to scare people from the ocean. It was really, if you think about the movie, 3 guys and a monster. Yes, there's somebody got it on the beach, a little Kittner kid, but it wasn't ravishing, killing. It was just 3 guys against, and that's why the movie, I think, really worked because it became them against it, But when it came out, it did affect people unbelievably, and I hear about that quite often. To this day, a lot of people just can't go in the water,
Yeah. 45 years later, and people are still scared of a shark that you made.
Yeah, I know.
Pretty crazy, man.
Yeah, I'm not happy about that. I mean, I'm pleased that they recognize a fine movie. And I would say a couple of years ago, the Catalina Museum did a shark exhibit that lasted 6 months. And I had a lot of my original drawings, and Greg Nicotero had made the characters life-size, incredibly. We had the cage. We had a lot of good stuff. But in any case, they were having a screening, not on a big screen. I hadn't seen Jaws in years. And I thought, I don't have to see it again. And then Julie, who was running the thing, she said, oh, Joe's going to talk about it after the movie. So my wife said, oh, I got a seat for here. You sit down and watch the movie. And guys, here's what happened was, it'd been so long, I was not looking at whether the shark was working or what I did or this. I was just enjoying it as a movie. And I realized the performances, those 3 guys, and when we needed the shark, it did its job, And I thought, I came out and I said, my God, that really is a good movie. I mean, you have to be away from it so you lose your personal involvement and just judge it as a film. And I think it's one of Steven's best films, It's just it really works.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and it still holds up to this day, man.
It does. And you know why, Casey? Because you look at the wardrobe or the hairstyles, it wasn't radical. You say, yeah, people sort of wear the hair, they had, the mayor had that silly coat jacket, but people wear things like that today. So it wasn't dated, I don't think.
No. So, Joe, we don't want to take up too much more of your time. I have one final question for you. I heard you say earlier about Steven Spielberg taking a lot of time to wait for those boats to move. And nowadays, you could use the CGI to erase those types of things.
Yeah.
If you could go back and redo everything with the technology today that they have, would you do it? How do you feel about CGI and stuff like that?
Yeah, of course, I get asked that question a lot. I have mixed feelings about CGI because if we did Jaws in CGI with the same restraint, but I could do a bit of a shark head so they would have some relationship. Like, I think it would be fine. In fact, it would be probably easier. Sometimes maybe the shark would be too slick. The problem I had with CGI when I started using is they would have not one shark, they'd have 10,000 sharks. They multiply. If they have a car crash, they have dozens of car crashes. They overused it because they could use it. And I think they're getting more restrained now. I think you've got to be a little more subtle. The idea is you want to, make it believable to the audience. And one big shark is pretty scary. But some of these sharks, they all have dozens of them out there. Of course, all right, but our guy's going to get it. I think the technology just has to be controlled because basically what we're doing is we're telling stories. And how best can we tell the story? And what tools can we use to tell the story? Is it a great location? I think there's so much CGI, there's just too much green screen. I mean, for an example, in Close Encounters, we went and shot the Devil's Tower. But when I have Melinda Dillon and Dreyfuss climbing up the mountain to go over and look at the big arena, I built a 7-story mountain on rollers that they could climb up in front of a huge front projection screen. And I built the arena, because I had a thing recently with Spielberg spoke. The art directors are honoring me, and Steven did a video, and he said he has never worked on a set as big as the one in Close Encounters to this day. And it was so big. Well, today they wouldn't build a set like that, but it was pretty interesting to have that size, of filmmaking where you're there and it's real. Mm-hmm. I know it's just a different attitude today.
Yeah, another thing that's different. I heard you mention in that Kevin Smith interview that you did about how you like today people can look up on Google how to find something crazy like a big mountain like that, but you had to drive how many miles to find something like that?
3,000 miles. Yeah, 3,000 miles. And I was saying this because I was at the Art Directors Guild that gave me an award, and I was saying, I had to drive 3,000 miles looking for a mountain. I said, but you guys would just Google it. I said, but you miss all the scenery along the way, I mean, it was a long drive, but I went, through Arches and all these wonderful places, Mount Rushmore, over to Devil's Tower, and you're driving. I was by myself. That movie started with just me and Steven, and then, and just briefly, it was going to be a really low budget sci-fi until Jaws came out, and then Steven expanded his concepts, and I expanded the sets, and so one success helps lead to another.
Yeah, good stuff, man. We enjoy your work very much, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this. And tell everyone where they can find you, your book, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the book is on Amazon. And I think, I really loved it because it's not about me so much, but it's about, the shark making the stuff and the relationship with the director and the storyboards. And how I put my crew together, you know, and yeah, so it's a different approach, and it's pretty complete, and it's on Amazon. It's not very expensive. It's like $26 or something.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, man. Are you on Twitter, Instagram, any social media at all?
Oh, I have this, joealvesmovieart.com,
Okay.
and that's where you could buy my storyboards and illustrations and all that stuff.
Great.
Nice talking to you guys.
Great talking to you too.
Thank you, Joe.
Take care.